Anyway, for the ride up to effectively, when I went there on a split-adjusted basis, it was 25 cents. The ride up to 110, we became more valuable than IBM during that period of time. And I learned a lot. But I learned even more in 2001, 2002, and 2003, and that's when the IT bubble burst. That's when our revenues went from almost $9 billion down to 5.4. And that's where you really have your mettle tested. And you understand what you need to do. And when you have a near-death experience, we could have been out of business as easily as we could be the $21.7 billion we are today. And we had gotten to 24,500 people, and we knew we had to take our spending down. And we took it down to some 17,000 people. We took a third of our costs out of our income statement. And with public shareholders, you have to tell them what you're going to do before you go do it. So this was an incredibly stressful and important part of my career, and important part of EMC's history. But you learn so much more from the tough times than you do learn from the good times. And I think we've learned a lot about how to grow, how to expand, and how the industry was changing. And so we are a storage company. Our roots are in storage, but in today's world, we do so much more. And since the year 2000, we've bought about 80 companies. We spent $16 billion doing that. And the first big inflection point for EMC, after the introduction of the Symmetrics that Moshe and I and his friends from Israel created, was in 2004. We bought a company called VMware. VMware is, to this day, really the world's leader in virtualization technology. And when I say that, I was in my office one day, and Joe Tucci, our CEO, calls me up, and I'm still CFO at the time, and he says, "Hey, grab the general counsel and come on down to my office. I just did something you're not going to like." And I said, "Okay." And I went down to his office, and he said, "I just hung up the phone, and I told this woman I'm going to buy her company." Okay, and we call her back up, and we put the points of the agreement together that afternoon, and there's a private company. We close it, or we announce it a few weeks later, and nobody in the world knows what virtualization is, right? I mean, and I'm going to give you a quiz later, but nobody knew what it was. We made a public announcement. We paid $635 million for a company that had 80 million in revenues in 2003. So that was a pretty steep price. And all of a sudden, the shareholders got very excited. All the hate mail started coming in. What are you guys doing? What does this company do? And within a couple of quarters, the growth rate of this company was doubling virtually every quarter. Because what virtualization does is it makes your server much more efficient. So I'll say historically, servers followed an application. And you got about if you got 15% capacity utilization out of a server, that was good. And if you needed more, you went and bought another server. What VMware did, you take one server and you could get 80 or 90% capacity utilization. And that was the sort of first step in virtualization. And now it can actually look at your entire server environment and look at it as one pool of compute. And so, I'm trying not to get too technical, but what it does is it saves a lot of money. Saves a lot of electricity, a lot of storage space, a lot of everything. But this company continued to multiply, grow incredibly well. So after a couple quarters, none of the shareholders were questioning it. They were saying, how big can it get? We brought about 15% of their stock public back in 2006. And in today's market, it's valued at about $35 billion. So $635 million. In today's world, it's about $36 billion. It's being called one of the best corporate investments ever. And the reason I tell that story is it was our first real foray out of our sweet spot. And technology companies that only work in their sweet spot and don't innovate, don't grow, don't understand where the market's coming, can't survive. I gave a speech this morning at the State House, and I talked a little bit about digital equipment. And I can look out in the audience here and see that there's probably a lot of people who remember the story of digital equipment. At the State House this morning, there were a lot of younger people in the audience, and they didn't know the story at all. But we had one of the world's real great technology companies for many, many years, just right down the road in Maiden, Mass. And because they didn't adopt adapt to the changing world of technology, you know, they're now the answer to a trivia question. And what we've been able to do is continue to invest in our core business, but also invest in new technologies. But the purchase of VMware was the first big inflection point in EMC's, I'll say, renaissance. Second big inflection point is in 2006, we bought a company in Bedford, Mass. Called RSA. RSA was the world's leader in information security. There's some 22,000 people this week out at the RSA conference in San Francisco. And it's a de facto standard security conference, and RSA technology is a de facto standard for many companies around the world how to access their computer systems. But again, it was us recognizing that, in fact, security was going to be incredibly important to our customers in the future. And in today's world, you can't open up a newspaper without talking about some cybersecurity threats, talking about companies being breached. And again, we had the foresight and the ability to see into the future, place a bet, and then execute on the bet. 2000, fast forward a little bit to 2010, and we recognized what was happening in the industry was that the information was growing at incredible rates. We commissioned a study a couple of years ago to look at what is the rate of growth of data. And data is measured in bytes. Digital data is measured in bytes. And one byte is just one piece of data. A trillion bytes is an exabyte. All right, so we have to continually find new names for the multiples of data. Back when we commissioned the study, there was less than 1 exabyte of digital data in the world. All right, by 2020, there's going to be 35 exabytes of digital data in the world, and I actually think that's low because of mobile devices, phones, pictures. Machine-generated information that's working today. There's a flood of information coming into organizations, enterprises, colleges, and universities around the world. We recognized that, and we bought a number of companies in 2010 all around big data. And, again, this is a term that has come to the forefront in the technology industry a couple of years ago. But again, it's EMC evolving itself to address new markets, to address the new trends in technology, and to deal with the flood of information. And people always ask me, what's next? What's coming at us? And you're going to hear a new term that's I'll say that we'll start talking about, we have talked about a little bit, but EMC World's coming up in May. In sort of the next step in virtualization and big data is the software-defined data center. And what's happening in our world, in the technology infrastructure world, is all the intelligence, which used to sit on the machine, is going into the software layer above the physical hardware. And more about that in a bit. So how did we get to where we are, and how did we create the leadership position that we have in the industry, coming out of our roots of data storage? Well, first and foremost, we believe in our research and development. And even in the times when we were taking a third of our costs out of the income statement, we never stopped our R&D programs. All right? And if you look at it as a percentage of revenues, back in those days, the percentage of revenues went much higher than they are normally, because we felt that R&D is the lifeblood of any technology company. We invest about 12% of our revenues in R&D. That last year, to give you a number, is about $2.5 billion. When you think about what you can do with $2.5 billion, you can do a lot, and we have done a lot. At the same time, we know that we can't innovate every good idea in technology, and that goes back to my comments about acquisitions, 80 acquisitions. We're ready in any year to spend an equal amount that we spend in R&D on acquisitions, depending on the target, depending on the purchase price. In any year, we'll spend from $1 billion to $2.5, $3 billion on acquisitions. And these, again, are very important because they either fill out our existing businesses, or they allow us to grow into new sectors, new vectors, or new markets outside of the U.S. that are very important to us. So, sort of summarize where we are today. I believe we're the world leaders in cloud storage. And as you think about cloud, there's public clouds and private clouds. Now, a public cloud would be, everybody's got email, right? So Yahoo, Gmail, whatever, AOL, whatever you use, that's a public cloud. That means you don't have the infrastructure to take care of your email, but somebody else is doing it, they're storing it. So you're using a public cloud. What enterprises around the world are doing is they're creating their own clouds in their environment. So they don't want to use someone else's infrastructure for their critical financial data or critical corporate data. They want to build a cloud. They want to be more efficient, more robust, more agile in their IT shops, but they want to do it inside the firewall, inside their own businesses. So we're helping companies, really the lion's share of our business in cloud is to helping companies build their own private clouds. And so, but we do work with a lot of service providers around public clouds. We help companies utilize private clouds, public clouds, and overall what we call the hybrid cloud. So as we talk to to companies around the world, we show them that the new way of doing business is it's not all one way, all the other. You've got to make sure your information is safe, but you've got to adapt to these new technologies. I talked about safety, and I talked about cyber risk. I was over in Dubai a few months ago, and I was at a dinner, and the fellow next to me was from one of the big banks, and he said, Aramco, Aramco's a big oil company over there, had just had 20,000 of their servers taken down. All right? In fact, their email application, actually, when you turned on email, it showed a burning American flag. And I said, oh, it was the Chinese. And he looked at me and he goes, no. He goes, we have our own Chinese. And it was the Iranians. All right? But it's just an illustration. It's a dangerous world out there, not just, I'll say in the political sense, but in the information technology sense. And organizations, governments, colleges, and universities have to be very, very sensitive to their data. And we're helping companies do this around the world. So again, we believe that we're leading the industry. The attendance at the RSA conference this week out in San Francisco would lead you to believe that. Big article yesterday, and we've had our own experiences. We were breached. RSA was breached. Just proving that no organization is safe from the terrorists or the nation states or the criminals who were just the student hackers who were out there to do it for fun. But it's very serious business, but we take it very seriously, and it's important. And I talked a lot about big data already, but big data is the third area, a huge focus for us. And this is just turning that flood of information that's coming into organizations in many different ways, turning that flood of data into actionable information, right? And when I say in real time, it's one thing to do something, run a report next week, run a report next month. When you can take a flood of data streams that are coming from many different sources, and turn it into actionable information in real time. This is what trading, the trading desks of a lot of the big investment banks want to do. A lot of the private equity firms, the hedge funds, they want to take all this information. They want to run some predictive analytics on it. And what's happening in this space? It's giving rise to a whole new set of IT skills. It's called data science. And you'll hear more and more about this as the nature of the IT industry changes. Because as we go to new and better ways of doing technology, in today's world you have server administrators, you have storage administrators, you have network administrators. You're not going to have all those roles, but you will have a role of data scientist. A few years ago at EMC World, we had our first data scientist summit. We had about 100 people show up. We didn't expect a lot. Last year it was sold out at 500 people. I'm sure we'll have more than 1,000 people there this May when we go out to Vegas and have EMC World. But this whole field that combines computer science, math skills, to write algorithms about what might happen is just exploding within the IT industry.